falling on its face and very expensive and nothing was working. So, and then the second guy who was talking about economics.
I'm signing up for that tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that looked really good. So Thomas hanging until Patty came to the room. They're gonna go hear Father Red.
I'm trying to get the taxes done.
If I did, I would.
Folder that I put everything together, kind of keep everything in one place, try to keep license plates, Joe. I have
Hello and welcome.
new plates for the
Glad to see you guys here. Yeah, great.
No, you could, there's printouts of that. So, yeah, you could zoom out.
Hey, you made it! Okay.
That would be good.
How are you? Yeah. Hey, how are you? Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I'll be taking pictures later.
Oh, okay. Well, Lauren knows.
Yeah. Well, I'll only be taking the back of your head.
Oh, okay.
So-
All right. Sure, of course. So, July 30th.
It's already on, and I will just,
You cross town, pull this up to the West, doing long trip. Sure.
you can track this.
Hello, how are you?
Tina.
And then if you just want to make sure this, you can just bring it back to me again tonight. All of you can unmute it, so you can actually. Yep.
And then when you hit, say here.
Yeah, use it.
Thank you.
And then thirdly, just since you already have Mike, because a couple of times we need the wireless ones for the live stream, and people were kind of talking before. They got to the mic guys, can you help me with that? So I'm not like shouting across the mic. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if somebody raises their hand,
Yeah. Exactly, just for the stream.
Hey, hi. I was thinking about it.
I got the former manager and former employee and former employee sisters. You met Jeffco. Hey, girls.
Oh, okay.
Boy Palmer. Former manager. Former employee. Former employee. I think it was
and then the faces, we need the faces. Thank you. Hey, is someone sitting here? No. Just that the Bird Star girls are all over here. I'm like, okay. checking in. How are you? I'm sitting with you. Ninth Street represented. On that house, 22 years. Yeah.
She's been in there for, I guess, 24 years.
Everything that's left.
3 years on Ford Street. Yeah, before we found a house on 9th Street. How long have you been there?
About 10 years now.
Where were you prior?
They're both here. Well, in a sense.
Are they different? Are the handouts different from last week?
Yes, they are.
So,
Oh, there's.
when our daughter was here, and she was we had a truck.
Two pretty good options.
Yeah, pretty good actually.
Well, that's reminiscent of our situation too. Our daughter is in Paris right now. She's studying at the American University of Paris. And we just came back from seeing her. Yeah. Our son is here in Denver. We've been studying architecture. So we get to go to both places.
Absolutely.
It is. We really enjoyed this last trip. It was really fun. But more than anything, to see how comfortable our daughter is on the streets of Paris. Like a native representative of the Persian.
How long has she been in?
Only 8 months now. But that's, she spent some good time.
So it's getting on towards 6 o'clock. In fact, it's 2 after. So I'd like to get us started. And my name is Beverly George. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County. And Rebecca Winning, who spoke last week, is sitting right down there. She's my colleague in this series. Welcome to the second week of a 5-part series sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County. Is media ruining America? This week's topic is understanding and confronting bias. But before we get started, I'd like to ask everybody to turn your phones off and just put them away, because we have lots of good material to go over this evening, and I don't want you to miss anything. We also want to give a very warm thanks to Jefferson Unitarian Church. Jefferson Unitarian opens their doors to us with warm arms, and they have a wonderful technical support for presentations like this, and we are so grateful for their support. So, the League of Women Voters is a national, nonpartisan grassroots organization. It works to protect and expand voting rights and ensure that everyone is represented in our democracy. It was founded in 1920, and its ongoing major activities include registering voters, providing voter information, boosting voter turnout, and advocating always for voting rights. It comprises more than 650 state and local leagues across the United States, including the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County, the JeffCo League. And we, together with the other leagues, work tirelessly to empower voters to defend democracy, and we take action on local, state, and even federal governmental matters. If you want more information, you can go to LWVJeffco.org. So we're going to begin with a homework check, and I don't know how many of you were here last week, but the homework for the week was basically to go home and look at a news media source that was on the opposite end of the spectrum from where you usually go to get your news, and follow a story and see how it's reported. Did they deliver the facts? Did you see any evidence of political bias? And would you share any examples? And did you learn anything new, either from that news media source or from the overall experience? So before we get started on bias, would anybody like to share anything they heard this last week in the news? It wasn't a very quiet week. Oh, I see a hand up back there. Can we get a microphone to that lady? We're streaming, and so people can hear. Thank you.
I listened to part of the president's ramble. I learned nothing new. I heard a lot of lies. I don't need to go on because this audience knows what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And I was going to listen to Fox talk about it, but I was so sick I couldn't.
All right. A microphone to Rebecca over here. Please.
Okay, I think anyone who watched the State of the Union saw messaging on both sides. Mm-hmm. And I watched the whole thing, and I mean, confession, I lean a little left, but I've been hearing for weeks about how Donald Trump is completely demented, he can't hold a thought, he rambles endlessly, he's like, incapable of holding a thought or running the country. And he did fine. He did fine for an hour and 50 minutes. And I thought, so I've been hearing all this messaging, but now I'm watching this and seeing something completely different. And so it's a lesson for me that it's easy to say, oh, these folks on the right have to really pay attention to the left. But we on the left really have to pay attention to the right, too, because both sides are demonizing the other. So that was my big takeaway.
Anyone else have something to chip in?
Come on.
All right, I see a hand back there.
I did not watch the State of the Union by President Trump. I watched the Alternative People's State of the Union, but I did watch several news channels that covered the State of the Union. One was MS Now, the other one was CNN, and then finally Fox News. And I did see, I think from CNN, had a lot of fact-checking, very many examples of fact-checking, more so than either of the other two channels did. MS Now also had some fact-checking, and Fox News didn't have as much fact-checking and more promoted the positives of the State of the Union.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, I see one more hand over here. Mary or Tom, thank you.
Hi, I don't have an example to share, having not attended last week's presentation, but the issue that I think comes to mind when I hear the different people who've talked is the notion of equal time to both sides, and to some degree this false equivalency. Basically, I do think from my own perspective that I'm biased by my beliefs. I also think that there are sources that try to provide balance to issues, and then there are sides that go way more extreme than others in presenting their case. And so I feel like it's important to recognize that bias exists on both sides, but in my opinion, one side is going way further down that path than the other.
Okay. I will add, my husband and I were watching it on PBS NewsHour with their commentators, the State of the Union. And so before and after, briefly, they had a panel of journalists and reporters. And I have to say they had 2 Republican voices on that panel. I think they had 6 altogether. So they were trying to, I think, present a fair and balanced opinion, or, you know, from these voices. And they did. They stood up for the Republicans, you know, and for the State of the Union in the speech. So it was, you know, it was pretty balanced, I thought, just based on that. Yes, microphone here, and then we'll move on.
You know, in terms of media, not strictly news, there's breaking news in the last hour that the David Ellison, the Paramount deal, has just, I guess Netflix dropped out. Is that what's happened? And I feel like that's a real concern for us, not so much in just strictly news, day-to-day news, but in access to the types of dramas we'll see on TV, the voices we won't hear or will hear in an imbalance. And that sometimes I think we overlook that there is a bias about what they're presenting and what they want us to see, what gets funded, what we you know, really get to talk about as a society when they've limited our access, and some of the more I don't even think they're controversial, but some of the different opinions just don't get heard.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now because we have a full agenda, and we're going to look at bias. So today we're going to look at several questions, probably more than I'm going to put up here, but these are the key ones. Are we biased? Can we accept and recognize our own inherent biases and get over them? Not discard them, embrace them, carry them with us, but not let them hinder us. And how can we recognize bias in print media, on broadcast networks, in podcasts, on social media, in subscribed newsletters, and from pundits and influencers? So we want to learn how to recognize it. And finally, what can we do about bias? So today's discussion is based primarily on chapters 14, 15, and 16 in Cindy Otis's book, True or False, a CIA Analyst's Guide to Spotting Fake News. In our first session, we talked about the history of media disinformation, or fake news, and how it can distort our perceptions of the world around us. This week, we want to tackle the biases that we bring to the table and learn how to recognize bias in the media. Let's do a deep dive into bias. All of us bring our inherent biases to the table, to our communities of family, friends, work, social contacts, all of the above. And as Cindy Otis, author of True or False, says in her book, and I'm quoting her, "We all have biases. They are inescapable. The the most free-thinking, woke, open-minded person in the world will still look at information through a certain lens that affects how they interpret and trust or don't trust it. So we'll start with some definitions, and they're pretty straightforward. Bias, it's a strong inclination of the mind or of a preconceived opinion about something or someone. A bias can be favorable or unfavorable. And an inherent bias refers to unconscious and automatic attitudes and beliefs stemming from a person's background, culture, and experiences. Inherent biases are often learned, and they are rooted in variables like a person's socioeconomic status, their race, their ethnicity, their educational background, even their religion. So bias can be conscious, and that's when a biased person is aware of their prejudices, or it can be unconscious when the biased person is unaware of the prejudices and believes their personal biases to be true. These include learned attitudes or stereotypes that exist in our subconscious and can involuntarily jump out and affect the way we think and act. It's helpful to check our inherent biases and be aware of them. What human properties and life experience make up our inherent biases? We can list them. I'll start us off with a couple of straightforward, easy ones: age and gender. For example, how might your age influence your perception of and opinions about things? How might someone who served in World War II, or even someone whose father served in World War II, feel about the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And why is that? And now think of an 18-year-old. How might they think differently about it, and why? Or we can look at gender. What kind of movies do you think boys like? And what kind of movies do you think girls like? And what are the differences and why? I know this example is based on rigid stereotypes, and there are dozens of crossovers. My daughter would go to an action film in a minute. But when you look at the top 10 movies for men versus the top 10 for women, based on ticket sales and opening weekend and who shows up, these stereotypes hold up. So we're going to do a little activity and take a few minutes for discussion afterwards. You have a worksheet in front of you, and it's the first handout we're going to work on. And we're only going to take a few minutes, so we're moving along. It's the title at the top is I'm biased, you're biased, we're all biased. And what we want you to do is take just a couple of minutes and a pencil and fill in a couple of those categories. They are personal cultural factors that you grew up with, and note how they may shape your beliefs and your biases. So I'm going to stop us for 5 minutes and we'll come back. thinking. When you finish, look up so I can kind of see where we are. I have technically about a couple of minutes left for you if you need it. All right, I think we can come back together now. So, did you learn anything as you went through? I mean, first of all, these properties kind of place you at a point in time and place and experience. But now they don't stand in isolation of each other. So, this is a description of somebody who might be going through this. Female, white, 80 years old, born 1946, Atlanta, Georgia, on the white side of the Jim Crow laws. Those four factors converge. And when you see the power of them converging, then you know, oh, this is a picture of the whole person. And these are things you carry with you all your life, but you want to be aware of them if they in fact can instill a bias in how you experience meeting new people in new situations. So, anybody want to add a comment?
Come on. This is a good way to look at it. It's a very good way to look at it.
Yeah, they all converge. And they form the threads of your life, woven into whole cloth. Yes? Microphone to Rebecca.
Okay, I almost fit your thing that you had. So I grew up in the heart of the Midwest, in Springfield, Illinois, in a family that looked a lot like Father Knows Best, and I was Kathy, okay? So I grew up in Springfield, Illinois, in a middle-class household. Until I got to college, I had never interacted with a black person or an LGBTQ person or kind of anybody outside my cultural bubble. So thank God, I moved on and I've been able to broaden that perspective, but I still catch myself if I'm, and I hate to admit this, but at least I recognize it. If I'm approached by a black man when I'm by myself at night in a dark place, I have just a little minute where I'm afraid. And that's because of those cultural factors that I grew up with back in that little Father Knows Best world. So the only thing that saves me is that I'm kind of aware of it and I try to overcome it and seek out experiences with people who are different from me so that I can understand them better.
I'll take that. Yeah. I was born in South Dakota,
in 1938. And my father was a welder, so he was deferred from the war, and we moved to Los Angeles. Now, consider that every person in South Dakota is a Republican and have been. My ancestors were Republicans. I had a great-grandfather who served in the South Dakota legislature. But when we moved to Los Angeles, we were in touch with all kinds of different people. And I saw that my father, not so much my mother, but my father, incorporated other people, other races, a couple of black people that I remember meeting when I was 5 and 6. And he grew in that way to include all people, which I am happy to say that I took more after my father than my mother, because she was actually anti-Semitic at some point in my high school years. Wow. Because I confronted her and continued to change her because of what I could bring to her. Mm-hmm. I don't have the same feeling that you do, Rebecca, about people. That a black man, I was confronted by a Japanese man once in Tokyo to, what do they call it, Happy Hotel? And I just said, no. And he turned around and walked away. Because I've thought about biases and thinking and beliefs this whole week. I've been working on it, because I think that we have those three attitudes: beliefs, thinking, and then which create our biases. Mm-hmm. And thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing. So let's move on, and on the back of this sheet, we're going to look next at inherent biases can impact dozens of our perceptions, decisions, and actions in our daily lives. So this second handout lists 18 biases we should all watch out for. Many of these we recognize immediately, like ageism, sexism, and racism. But some of these are kind of niche biases. So at the top or near the top, you see name bias. And so what picture comes to mind when you hear the name Mary Catherine or the name Chantal Shanice? And then there's beauty bias. Beauty bias refers to the tendency to favor individuals perceived as physically attractive, and that leads to unfair advantages, particularly in the workplace. Consider you're hiring someone for a job in your office, and two people show up for an interview. One looks like Amal Clooney, and the other person is overweight with a bad complexion. Otherwise, they have similar qualifications for the job. Which do you hire? And then there's the halo effect. That's when we develop an overall positive impression of someone because of one of their qualities or traits or talents. How many of us were dismayed to discover that O.J. Simpson was arrested and tried for murdering Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman? He had been a hero to many. Or that Chauncey Billups more recently was involved in an NBA betting scandal. Did we find that hard to believe? That's the halo effect, and those halos can tarnish. So we don't have time to cover all of them here, but this sheet is handy. Take it home, look at it, and then ask yourself if you think any examples of these have played a role in your life. So with so many inherent biases lurking in our unconscious minds, how do we defend against them? Well, first, complete a rigorous self-assessment of the inherent biases you have and keep them in mind when you're processing new information and relationships. And next, if you want to bridge the political divide, we have to want to do the work. We have to want to get to the truth of things and learn to appreciate and value people who think differently than we do, whose experiences are different from what we've experienced. And only then can we return to a more civil, productive democracy. There's a company called Culture Plus Consulting. And it is a consulting firm that was created to work with multinational employers to help them develop cultural intelligence. They developed a model for managing unconscious bias to work with these employers, and they came up with 6 evidence-based strategies. You don't have to own a multinational corporation to use them. They're really kind of common sense. So first, slow down. Don't react to everything you hear or read. Instead, take time to reflect, collect your thoughts, and be deliberate when you respond to others. Engage in perspective taking, and that's defined as the ability to understand and consider another person's thoughts, emotions, and point of view. It involves the cognitive process of recognizing and empathizing with another person's experience, which enhances social interactions and communications. Before you pass judgment, proactively imagine other people's thoughts and feelings. And then from time to time, ask yourself if your own inherent biases are coloring your perspective. Embrace cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is the ability to understand, adapt, and work in different cultural contexts. It encompasses an understanding of cultural norms, behaviors, and communication styles, and that allows individuals to better understand folks from culturally diverse environments. And then seek out role models. If you see people in your life who already have this talent, they've really worked at it, and they interact so effectively with people from different backgrounds, watch them, follow them, and just learn from them. Finally, expand your own community. Seek out and build diverse friendships and networks. All right, do we need to take a break now, or can we go on? We have gotten to the point where we've done our introspection. We're aware we all have biases, and we're going to, we could take a break if you need it. Anybody need to use the restroom or get a cookie? No? Go on? Okay. So now we're going to move forward, and we're going to look at bias in the media. How can we recognize it and respond to it? So, in our first session, we learned how some media is actually appealing to our biases to capture audiences and increase engagement. And we also found that Elon Musk's AI engine Grok was asked the question, what's currently the biggest threat to Western civilization? And it answered, the media. Quote, it is contributing to the biggest current threat to Western civilization through societal polarization, fueled by misinformation and disinformation. And as Sidney Otis says, quote, we know that our inherent biases affect the information we pay attention to. They can lead us to ignore important information or automatically accept other things because they confirm what we already believe. Biases can also cause us to fall for fake news. Cindy Otis further notes, quote, social media takes this automatic tendency to a whole other level. We friend people who agree with us, and we mute, unfriend, or unfollow people we don't. And algorithms compound the problem. They track our biases, and they serve up content that reinforces them. And this pushes us into information silos, where we only get information that supports our own views, and we never see facts or data that challenge our current perceptions. So let's look at some more definitions. Cognitive bias. That's a systematic error in thinking, affecting how we process information, perceive others, and make decisions. It can lead to irrational thoughts or judgments, and it's often based on our perceptions, memories, or individual and societal beliefs. This is actually just another definition, I believe, of inherent bias. Now, confirmation bias. That's the tendency to seek out and use information that confirms one's views and expectations. In other words, cherry-picking information to validate certain beliefs and biases that we have. And this affects our ability to think critically and objectively, which can lead to skewed interpretations of information and overlooking information with opposing views. And then there's cognitive dissonance. That's the mental discomfort we go through when our personal views and ideas about something do not match the actual facts or evidence presented to us. So now we're going to have another little discussion. And we're asking ourselves, overall, do we look for information or confirmation, of our biases in the news sources that we choose? And these two questions are related to it. They're kind of an extension. Have you ever changed your mind about a news event based on consistent, reliable facts reported in the news that disagreed with your original opinion? And on a broader sense, not necessarily related to the news, have you ever changed your mind about a personal bias from an experience that redirected your thinking? Anybody want to share? Okay, I'm going to tell you a story then. Back when Richard Nixon was president and Watergate was unfolding day by day by day in the news, I was very young. We'd just bought our first home, and we were planning to start a family. I mean, my life was so happy and rosy. And I kept hearing this background chatter, and I even remember seeing him do an address to the public, to the American public, and say, "I am not a crook," and his jowls were shaking. That was Richard Nixon. And I wanted so much to believe it. Well, a couple of weekends later, we went up to meet Tom's family for a weekend, and we were at French Lick in Indiana. It's really beautiful. It was autumn. The leaves were turning. And so we met for dinner, and my brother-in-law, both my husband and my brother-in-law, his brother, were lawyers, and they were young lawyers then, full of zeal. And I remember Sonny came down, and he was beside himself, and he said, "He's just called for the firing of Archibald Cox." That was the Saturday Night Massacre. Couldn't find anybody to fire him. And I want you to know, that halo effect, or whatever the heck I was carrying around, fell on the floor and broke into a million pieces. So that's an example of where it just kept hammering, that chatter in the background, peeling away all the stuff coming out of the Washington Post. And it was suddenly, I thought, you know, the President of the United States is a crook. And so that was, I just couldn't face it anymore, and hold true, to thinking, surely not. Well, surely. Anybody else? Rebecca?
Okay, I don't want to hog these comments, but I know we all have stories. And the stories we all have are important stories to tell and for other people to hear. So I'm going to tell you a story. This was when I was 18 years old, and I was hitchhiking through England, trying to get to London. And this couple picked me up in a van. I was with another woman, wasn't by myself. They picked us up. We got into the van, and the guy had on a sleeveless leather jacket with chains and stuff. And so we're making conversation, and he's like, "Where are you girls from?" Well, we were from the Midwest. And he said, "Oh, I know some people in Oakland." And I'm like, "Oh, who?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm with the Hells Angels." And we were like, wow, did we just make the biggest mistake in our lives to get in the van with this guy? And they were the nicest people. They took us where we wanted to go. They bought us lunch because we were, poor students. I mean, it just completely shattered that preconception that I had. So I know other people here have stories. Oh.
So I never have liked tattoos. I just don't. And when my daughter first got one just on her ankle and I didn't notice it, I didn't like that. But it's not so much, I just never have liked them. And so I think I made kind of I never really rejected people, but I just didn't think it was right. Why did they ruin their beautiful skin, that they were born with? And when it really came to light how deep it was when my son had a birthday party for his son when they were little. And, sometimes the parents come. And this guy came in, and he had tattoos all over his neck and around, and and I thought, oh my gosh, and he's got a 6-year-old, and I watched him interact with all the kids because he stayed. His son had some developmental things, but he stayed. And I think he interacted so wonderfully with all the kids. So it just reminded me, I knew that I had that bias, and I tried not to judge by it, but I think that really, really reminded me that you can't judge a book by its color.
Okay. Well, let's move on. And, we've got one more. Okay, excuse me.
It was easy. She just passed the mic back to me. This is my own experience from a definitely upper-class white family. The most important thing to me in learning how to relate to other people from different cultures and different races was military basic training. My thesis is that you have to live with people to come to understand them and to make that leap forward, that there are other worlds that other people come from, but you're all the same, especially, when the sergeant tells you to do push-ups. It didn't help me any coming from Wyomissing, Pennsylvania.
That's a very good point. I think the Army and the military, in many cases like that, is a great equalizer, and you find the commonality of humanity there. Yeah. All right, we're going to move ahead, and we're going to look at definitions in order to address bias in the media. So there's unintentional bias, and some media bias is unintentional. Most reputable journalists, particularly members of the U.S. Press Association, are trained very well to guard against bias. However, some journalists may inject their own personal biases into a news story without realizing it. We've talked about that. This may affect what types of stories they cover and how they tell those stories. We know how pervasive inherent biases can be, and we all need to be on the lookout for unintentional bias in the media. However, sometimes less reputable journalists and news commentators practice intentional bias, and that's when a media outlet purposely tells a story in a certain way to influence the audience's opinion about something. And this intentional bias can approach the realm of propaganda, which is defined as information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Now here we are back at the ad fontes chart up on the screen, and we looked at it the first time last week in session 1. It sorts media outlets according to their biases. So just to review, the y-axis, the vertical axis here, gives you news value and reliability and credibility. You want to be high on that y-axis. So anything across the top means it's reliable, it's credible, it's dependable, fact-based news. It will have sometimes some analyses, but it's to the point and it's necessary. The x-axis across the bottom, if you go right to the center and go up to the top, it says middle, and that just means it's centrist reporting, just the facts, ma'am. And then if you move a little left, it's starting to lean left, farther left, in leaning politically, and then it just continues. It does the same thing on the right side, leaning a little right, farther right. Where you want to avoid being is in the far left or far right lower corners. There's very little fact-based anything of substance there, and an awful lot of persuasion for the listeners. So you're looking at Tony Michaels and the Jimmy Dore Show on the left, and those are extreme, and they are essentially, I think, propaganda, but certainly fake news, and Louder, Crowder, and Alex Jones. If you're up at the top, if you see that triangle up at the top, where it's an inverted V, and you see all those sources, so the ones in the very center top are like AP and Reuters, and ABC is just slightly left, and Wall Street Journal is just a little right. Even the PBS NewsHour, it's a little left, but those are in good company up there. They're going to deliver the news, and they're not going to try to coerce. So keep that in mind. If you come down, even I see Rachel Maddow, and I know I watch her sometimes, but sometimes she is more opinion than fact. I mean, she is trying to sell an agenda. And if you come over here and you look further down, I'm trying to find someone that's midpoint down. Maybe Fox and Friends is in there. That's another one that has just an awful lot of opinion. So let's see how this plays out in real life. And we're going to look at All Sides. All Sides Technologies, Inc. is an American company that estimates the perceived political bias of content on online written news outlets. It surveyed its users back in December of 2024, which was an election year, presidential election year, to determine which media stories sparked the most media bias that year. So, this is the results, and remember, these are responses from people who sign up with All Sides, so they wanted the input from their users. And the question was, which story topics came burdened with a lot of bias? And so they felt the top two are pretty much tied at 72% of the responses and 71%. So two of the top picks were if the story was about abortion laws, abortion access, or if the story was about immigration, securing the border, seeking asylum, Laken Riley's murder, the Haitian migrants living in Ohio. They said those stories just came loaded with bias. And then coming down, they were giving their responses, and they said also high in bringing bias to these news stories was anything on the LGBTQ issues and the Middle East, Israel, Hamas, Palestine, the protests at U.S. colleges, and so forth. And those came in pretty close together, too. And you have to get down, this was surprising to me. Most of the All Sides users thought that our stories on the economy, crime rates, FBI crime rates, school shootings, and stories on the hurricanes. If you recall, Helene and Milton swept through the Southeast in the fall of '24, late summer. And they felt like, no, those were pretty much from the response anyway, they felt it was more fact-based reporting. And so it's interesting the topics that carry the burden of so much bias. So you have a handout from All Sides analysis and a more recent story. And you should have picked it up, but I hope you got it. So we're gonna go look at that next. And it should look something like this that's up on the screen. All right, and this story came out in November of 2025, so that's last November. And if you recall, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated the website, and they reversed their position on vaccines and autism. It was a shift from previous guidelines, and it drew criticism from many public health experts. Now, the All Sides did an analysis of different news outlets, and the one up here on your left is actually from a right-leaning news media called the Epoch Times. We're going to look at headlines in particular, and the sentences under it are kind of like the lead sentences into the article. But the headline from the right, one leaning right, said, CDC say vaccines may cause autism. And then if you go over here, this one over on this far right side is actually from a left-leaning media and CNN Digital, and it reads, CDC website changed to include false claims that link autism and vaccines. The actual story was true that the CDC changed, and it did contradict their previous stance. But you can see how the headlines are grabbing you. And All Sides does this same analysis for current stories of the day. So you can go look at allsides.com. Remember, they're just measuring and estimating bias in news stories. And you can sign up and they'll send you like a weekly response to a major article. So based on the headlines though, these are clickbait. So where would you click? Remember, headlines are designed to pique your interest so that you click on the story. Well, would you click on something that affirms your biases or something that challenges them? And that's what we want to think about, something that challenges. Now, research tells us that 59 to 75% of shared articles are never actually opened or read. In other words, the majority of people form opinions or share stories based solely on the headline. That's amazing to me. So we're going to look at a recent example of headlines. And these headlines all came on the news October 28th of last year. Now, to put your mind back in the historical setting of just a few months ago, it was the 28th day of the government shutdown, and every day it was gloom and doom. But if you recall, there were a lot of federal workers had been laid off, or were going to be. The ones that were still in place were not getting paychecks. There was a lot in the news about that from the FAA and the air traffic controllers working unbelievably long hours. They'd already missed one paycheck, blah, blah, blah. But on October 28th, the news headline in almost every news station was that SNAP funds were going to cease to be funded November 1st. So we're going to look at 3 different sources and see how they were addressing this shutdown. So the first one is a newsletter from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and this is their headline that day: cutting off SNAP benefits could mean 1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. Sounds pretty dire. Okay, the next one is from Paul Krugman's Substack newsletter. Paul Krugman won the 2008 Nobel Prize in the Economic Sciences for his work on international trade. He is widely recognized as a liberal economist and commentator. His newsletter headline on the 28th of October read like this: "The Hunger Games begin. 40 million Americans are about to lose food stamps." And then on Fox Digital News, This was their headline: Senate Democrats block Republicans' bid to end 28-day government shutdown. No mention in the headline of SNAP funds. Now, can you tell from those three headlines what is fair and what is balanced? And where would you click? I'll tell you this, one of the stories, if you looked under the headline and read it, had all kinds of numbers and data, and it was in support of the headline. It justified the headline and the numbers there. It even gave a map with a distribution of SNAP recipients across the United States, rural and urban. And then it gave a brief history of SNAP and the fact that it had cranked up a notch during the pandemic. So it really had a lot of data. And the one that didn't mention it actually did mention SNAP, but only in the closing 2 sentences. So it's interesting. We have to read the content. So what about bias in other forms of media? What about news that's reported and discussed and analyzed on podcasts, on social media, by late-night pundits, or by influencers? There are thousands of influencers vying for your attention, using podcasts, Substacks, YouTube videos, TikToks, and more. And these media sources can, in fact, provide specialized news reports and analysis, presented by experts in different areas like the law, public health, foreign policy, education, the economy. Influencers wield a tremendous amount of power in modern-day discourse. In 2024, surveys from the Better Business Bureau showed that 82.7% of U.S. marketers partnered with influencers in creative ad designs. And they also found from survey responses that 71 to 74% of U.S. consumers trusted influencers to some degree, reflecting their growing role in shaping opinions. Digital influencers can be credible, and they can provide important insights into policy discussions. They can discuss complex issues in layman's terms. They can help the public understand the complexities and implications of policy decisions. And they can take the time to message with details versus depending on just headlines and sound bites. And finally, they can promote a position based on facts and data versus emotions and outrage. So we're going to look at 2 podcasts now. And these podcasts both deal in the law. So at the top is Stay Tuned with Preet. That's Preet Bharara. And it's a top-rated legal podcast, and it discusses law, politics, current events, with guests, and their guests range from legal experts, that would be like a legal professor or maybe a retired judge, to journalists who report on the law. Preet often breaks down complex issues like Supreme Court cases, political investigations, global affairs. Preet Bharara himself is an Indian-American lawyer, formerly a U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he's currently a partner at WilmerHale. He's widely recognized as one of the most influential prosecutors in modern American history. Preet positions himself as a defender of the rule of law, not as a partisan progressive, and Bharara sticks to the letter of the law and cites legal precedents in grounding his review of court rulings past and present. So now we're going to look at the one on the bottom, Advisory Opinions. It's hosted by David French and Sarah Isker, and this show reviews and discusses Supreme Court cases, constitutional law, and broader legal debates, but through a conservative lens. David French is a senior editor at the Dispatch. He's a former attorney specializing in constitutional law and religious liberty cases. Sarah Isker is a Harvard Law graduate. She's a former DOJ spokesperson and a political strategist. Together, French and Isker promote conservative legal positions centered on constitutional originalism, judicial restraint, limits on federal power, and strong protections for free speech and religious liberty. So consider this. These podcasts put forward very different legal positions, but that may not mean they're biased. Which podcasts would you likely listen to? Are you choosing media based on confirmation bias, seeking to bolster deeply held biases and beliefs? Do you ever purposely seek out an opposing point of view? And how do you determine if a podcaster is in fact credible? And consider further, if you happen to take the time and listen to both, you would get a broader 180-degree view of legal positions. So, to that last or next to the last question, what do you look for in a podcaster? Well, hopefully you would look for proven expertise. You would check their qualifications, their professional experience, their education, or their history of work in the niche they talk about. For example, a fitness influencer with certifications or a medical influencer with education and experience in the healthcare field, they're more credible than someone without that. Content quality. Consistent, well-researched, and informative posts show they know their subject. Shallow, clickbait-style content is a red flag. And reliable sources. Are they referencing credible sources? Do they share reliable facts and data that advance their position? And do they have transparency? By that I mean, credible influencers disclose their partnership and sponsored content. If they have hidden promotions and constant product pushing without disclosure, it will undermine their trust in their public. And finally, social proof. That means they get mentioned in reputable media, they collaborate with respected brands, and they get endorsements from other experts in their field. And all put together, that increases their credibility. Political podcasts exist to advance a political agenda. Ad Fontes has recently added political podcasts to their bias chart to show which lean left or right or center, or have more or less truthful reporting underlying the broadcasts. So these are the 25 they've set out to review. And it's the same setup. High credibility at the top. Across the bottom, if you go to the middle and go up, at the top you see the Journal, and I can't read the other one just down from it. But even Ezra Klein is at the top. If you look at that green dotted line at the top, they're showing you these up here do have a good basis for what they are broadcasting about. And some of them will lean a little left or a little right, but you're in safe territory listening to them. And of course, the ones farther down have less credible foundations under their arguments, and if they lean far left or right, it's pretty obvious they're trying to push a particular agenda. So we've already covered all sides, and we've covered Ad Fontes. These are both good sources for measuring bias in the news or estimating it. Sometimes All Sides uses the verb estimates. These are not the only two, but they do have experience in this area, and they're a good beginning spot. So what do? We need to break out of our news silos. We need to check the bias charts and ask yourself if you follow your media sources because they keep you well informed and have complete and balanced information, or only because you feel comfortable and agree with what they report. You need to make a conscious effort to access news from the most credible, least biased news sources available to you. And at the same time, in our exercise last week, access a wide range of news sources and listen to the other side to get a clearer and more accurate picture of what's being reported and maybe what your family's been chattering about. And be aware and wary of news reports that read more and sound more like opinion pieces. We have a 24/7 news cycle going now, And if you think about it, that's a big slug of time to fill. So the news story itself, even as it develops, may only take a few minutes. And a lot of time is spent commenting and opining about the story. So while Fox News special with Brett Baer skews right, it's still up at the top and falls within the safe zone for rational reporting. But Fox News commentator Jesse Waters falls into the unfair persuasion category. And likewise, the PBS NewsHour lands within the safe zone, leaning a little left. But commentators like Jen Psaki at MS Now are less reliable on the facts and just a lot of opinion passing. So stick to the news, and for consistently reliable information, watch ABC or Scripps News Weekend. They're pretty good. And next, check out the sources that your media outlet regularly cites. If a news organization only uses sources or analysts that lean one way politically, it's a red flag for bias. And finally, we're going to look at cherry picking. And that's when media picks data to support a biased position and blur the facts behind the numbers. So this graphic up here is full of bias and cherry picking, actually. I don't know if anybody can see. I'm a former teacher, so I have to point out it has a grammar error, a math error, and a spelling error. So I just had to say that. It just drives me crazy. Okay, but it's also very misleading, because if you read it, it starts to sound like immigrants, it says, if I'm correcting the grammar, immigrants are becoming or have become very dependent on SNAP funds. So if you look up there, it's particularly singling out Afghani, Somali, Iraqi, and Haitian migrants living in the U.S. It almost reads, I'm going to use the Somali numbers all the way through just to do the math. It almost reads like 42.4% of the SNAP recipients are Somali migrants. You know, if you look at it at a glance, a lot of people would come away with that. Well, we need to look at some facts. And so the facts say that those percents under the different migrant ethnic groups represent the percent of the migrant group that's on SNAP. In other words, 42.4% of Somali migrants do, in fact, receive SNAP funds in the United States. So, taking that number a little further, the question arises, that could be a big number, but how big is the actual number? So you need to know how many Somali migrants are in the U.S., and that number, when you query it, is between 250,000 and 300,000. So I took the bigger number, and I took 42.4% of 300,000. I came up with 127,200 Somali migrants living in the U.S. receive SNAP funds. That's a big number. Next question is, how many people in the United States receive SNAP funds and benefits? 41 million. Okay, so I took 127,200 divided by 41 million, multiplied by 100 because I want to switch it into percent, and I get 0.31% of SNAP recipients in the U.S. are in fact Somali migrants. Okay, we're not done. A little bit more. Of all the SNAP recipients, the 41 million, 89.4% of them are U.S.-born citizens. Okay, I can do the mental math. That means 10.6% of SNAP recipients in the United States are not native-born Americans or U.S.-born Americans. Okay, so if you look that number and parse it out further, of the 10.6% born outside the U.S., 6.2% have become naturalized citizens. That leaves 1.1% who are in fact refugees seeking asylum, and 3.3% are here as legal residents. So, my question to you is, does the graphic tell you anything truthful behind those numbers? No.
It doesn't tell you what
Well, 89.0, the 41 million recipients of SNAP in the country, of whom 89.4% are US-born citizens. So you could run those numbers on 41 million and figure out how many American citizens are getting SNAP. And that doesn't include the little fraction we did on the Somalis, who in fact had been, those are US-born citizens. And then the little number, I forget what I got, what was it? 6.2% of the remaining 10, if you subtract from 100, 10.6, those are naturalized citizens who were, from all different ethnic groups, not just Somalis. Okay? So, what do we need to do? Well, we need to seek out the other side. And that means look for the other side and learn about them. See what they're seeing and reading. If you do, it'll protect us from bias. It will deepen our understanding of the broader picture. It'll strengthen our ability to make informed decisions. And it will help us better understand the motivations and the fears and values of other people. One more mention that we want to remind you to give government-run media outlets the side eye. Cindy Otis in her book noted that in many countries like China, Russia, and Iran, and others, the government either runs, sponsors, or plays a very big role in directing what gets reported and how it's presented so that their quote-unquote news channels become not much more than propaganda designed to advance their agendas. When government takes control of media, it's a recipe for the spread of fake news and propaganda. We also learned in week 1 with the consolidation of media in America, where large corporations control a majority of media outlets, this bears watching as well, especially because corporations are becoming more and more politicized, and they can benefit from advancing their key policy objectives. I believe it was last week, Rebecca reported on one of her slides that 6 corporations control 90% of what we read, watch, or listen to in our country. And they're big corporations. They were GE, Disney, News Corp, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. And finally, we want to watch out for loaded terms. We've all witnessed the decline of civility in modern-day discourse and the rise of rude, outright name-calling, which is a worrisome trend in our country. They used to use the term dog whistles, but dog whistles allude to the fact that it's kind of hard to, it may or may not be what they're saying. But this is outright rude name-calling. So here's an example.
Now, yesterday, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called out Democrats for their unwavering allegiance to this new radical wing of the Democratic Party. Take a look.
The Democrat Party's main constituency are made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. That is who the Democrat Party is catering to, not the Trump administration and not the White House and not the Republican Party, who is standing up for law-abiding Americans, not just across the country, but around the world.
Now, these comments prompted this unhinged meltdown from the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Take a look.
We got Caroline Leavitt, who's sick. She's out of control. And I'm not sure whether she's just demented, ignorant, a stone cold liar, or all of the above. But the notion that an official White House spokesperson would say that the Democratic Party consists of terrorists, violent criminals, and undocumented immigrants. This makes no sense. That this is what the American people are getting from the Trump administration in the middle of a shutdown.
So, does this exchange give you confidence in either party? What did you pick up on this? And are any of these remarks statesmanlike? Did they promote or advance a policy agenda? Anybody have a comment? Okay. So now what do? Before you feel your blood pressure climb or lose sleep over a headline or a story, take a break from the news. Literally, for 24 or 48 hours, it's good for your health. You don't even need to take an aspirin and call the doctor in the morning. But take yourself off all means of digital media. The news on the nightly news, whatever station you watch. Get off Facebook, because you'll see it trickling in there. Stop reading the Denver Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal just for a day or two. It's okay. Put away your digital devices and spend time in relationship with people so that you remind yourself when you're with your family, your neighbors, and friends of the things you have in common rather than the media that's constantly working to tear us apart. And then when you're ready to re-engage with the news, seek out centrist media and leave the outrage channels behind. So here are our takeaways from today. We're all biased. You, me, all of us. It's important to know our biases because they color our perceptions of people and events. Media can be biased as well, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Media sources color the news to present a position versus presenting only the facts. It's important to recognize media bias and to know when we're being manipulated. Digital media can use our biases to dish up content that reinforces our biases and beliefs versus offering any opposing viewpoints. And not all media is biased. Credible media can provide facts and data that challenge our assumptions if we're ready to listen. We can and should choose to be responsible consumers of media. And I like to remind myself often that the oracle of truth does not reside in my echo chamber. So thank you for coming tonight. Don't miss next week, our third session, and we're going to take a look at propaganda and polarization and how to survive the avalanche of fake news. You can read chapters 17 and 18 in True or False if you're doing that at home, and that'll be background for that topic. And we'd love for you to fill out an evaluation form and give us your feedback. We welcome your comments. We aim to please and we aim to improve. We want to give special thanks to our graphic designers, Ray Grosser. She did our slide design and production, and Andrew Tench, who did our marketing materials for our website, and we really appreciate their efforts so much. And don't forget to come back for week 5. We want to thank some of these are our advisors as well as our panelists. Dr. Philip Chen, he is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Denver. Bob Steele is a retired journalism professor and ethics and values scholar. Dr. Chris Jennings is Professor and Chair of Journalism and Media Production at Metro State University. Larry Rickman, co-founder and publisher of the Colorado Sun, and Dr. Angelica Kalika, an assistant teaching professor of journalism at the University of Colorado Boulder. These people are going to be the experts we'll be hearing from in week 5. And that's it for our second week. We have time to take your questions, and another reminder to please fill out an evaluation form before you leave. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Questions? Great job. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Okay. We need a microphone.
First.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. On your piece about the number of Somali immigrants that were on food stamps, SNAP program, did you try to find anything on the left side that was as egregious as what was being promoted on the right side?
No, actually, I actually did not. On the migrants getting SNAP benefits from the government, I did not. And so, I bet we could.
Well, that's I think my concern is that, yes, we see incredibly egregious propaganda from the right side. And although I think that the left side leans left, I have never found anything that outrageous on the left side. They seem to be more measured than the right.
I don't know. If you go to the extreme left,
Oh, I think that's a good point. Back when we were looking, was it with the Jimmy Dore show, and there was another one on that slide. I'm sure there was probably something that was just way far left and very empty of fact.
But that's not, I mean, it's not Fox News versus MS Now. You know, Fox News is in our homes, you know, all the time. But can you find anything as, say, the balance of Fox News, rather than go to the far, far corners?
leave us your email address.
And we'll look that up, and we'll see what we can come up with. I do know, I'm trying to remember, I think he comes on after Jen Psaki. Is it Lawrence O'Donnell? Lawrence, is that him? Okay. His whole thing is, and I'm not being critical, it just simply is a lot of opining. And so,
Putting out something that you think is a fact.
right. He may be cherry picking. I'll have to watch him and just try to see if I see cherry picking or something. I know I personally, taking off my league sign for a minute, I personally lean left. But at any rate, the league is nonpartisan. So we try to give both sides.
I just want to say, and you'll hear more about this next week when we talk about the avalanche of fake news and propaganda, you can sign up and get weekly email summaries of like Snopes.com, which is a fact-checking organization that fact-checks stories that are coming out. And there are a couple others that we'll talk about next week.
And also Tom he sent me an email to remind me, Ad Fontes, if you signed up with them, they will take a story of the week and parse it out for you in a newsletter once a week, not 3 times a day, which drives you crazy. But just one really good analysis of a story, and the one they happened to send out, I think it was this week or last week, was Pam Bondi's testimony before the Congressional Committee about, they were asking her, why did it take so long to release the files? Why didn't you release them completely? Would you like to apologize to the victims who were in attendance, et cetera? And it was really interesting. I read it, and this is, you just sign up on Ad Fontes and you'll get one a week. But I sent a note back to Tom, and what I noticed as I read it was the farther right or the farther left the analysis writers got, the farther they got from the actual testimony she gave, which was bad enough. I mean, it actually was. But seriously, they got to, if you were on either side, you'd start harking back to what she's done in the past, and then they're also projecting and predicting into the future with, well, when she's replaced someday, they're going to have to start over at ground zero, rebuilding the DOJ. And so they're just kind of predicting how bad it's going to be. And so I thought, well, what about just stick to what she said? All you have to do is print what she said, and that'll be enough.
I just want to finish this thought, because I did, when I found these things, I subscribed. So I get a weekly summary from Snopes, and I get a weekly summary from, I think it's Ground Media. I can't remember which one. But, and the first weekly summary I got from Snopes, there was more fake news coming from the left than the right. And that was a big eye-opener for me, FYI.
Yes, back there, microphone to Laura.
One of the, I think, things that really hit me hard about bias was Renee Good and the videos that we all saw. You know, there was like 5 or 6 different videos, but they all showed, you know, what happened that day. And what amazes me about bias is that some people saw she was trying and did hit the ICE agent, okay? Other people saw she absolutely did not hit the ICE agent and was just trying to get away. So we all saw the same things, but so many different people had different views of what happened watching the exact same videos. And to me, that just shows that people's biases about the people who are protesting, biases about the people, what they think about ICE, you know, that really affects how you interpret what you see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is this on? I just think it's really critical for all of us to understand that you can't really compare. And some of the media that we're mixing and matching are not held to the same standards. Most of us think of Fox News as a news organization. It's not. It's not governed by any of the same regulations that NBC or CBS or ABC. Those people hold broadcasting licenses. They have public files. You can complain. They have a standard, and their licenses are dependent on upholding those standards. As you've pointed out beautifully, that those standards have changed, and you know, we are in a whole new world with Trump, and he's exercising some of those regulations that have governed those organizations differently. And so there's been quite a bit of discussion about that. But Rachel Maddow and Fox News and pretty much anybody on cable is not held to the same standard. And I think really the point of that is that we, as individuals, are responsible for checking our sources. Who do you believe? There actually are people on Fox News channel who are quite talented and reliable journalists. I think they're few and far between, and I think that they allow themselves a lot of opinion that they didn't previously in their earlier parts of their career. And that's also true of MSNBC, you know, and I'm thinking of Bret Baier and I'm thinking of Andrea Mitchell, depending on those two people, both talented journalists, respectable ideas, but they really, really do salt what they're doing now. I haven't seen Andrea in a long time, but they really do salt their opinion into what they're saying. So that's on us, right, to decide. And Substack, kind of the same way. It's a totally different animal. That is literally a soapbox to stand on. And I'm entertained by it. I listen to a lot of it. I listen to a cross-section of a lot of it. But I'm also very much aware that there are original sources that are available. As bad as the technology can hurt us in some of the fake news and some of the it also gives us first-person access to the actual congressional record, which you can go read, and you can easily access, whereas when I was younger, it was very difficult, unless you were standing in Washington and you could go over to the building and look up the document. And that's a wonderful thing for me to have been able to look things up and really read what was that opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but if I can read what the Supreme Court is saying, I mean, it takes me longer than a lawyer. Sometimes a Substack will help me interpret it, but it is an original source document that we as citizens really should be talking about and really should. And then my last point was that in that legitimate media, and you talk about bias, I think, and I'm a retired journalist, I think that we're all trained well to, for the most part, for the what I would call legitimate or first sort of tier media, in understanding our own biases. But I also think that, and what I mean by that is that I can go to something I absolutely hate absolutely everything about it, and understand that I need to tell this story fairly, and I need to understand what it is. But I don't intend at any point to give you a final answer. My point as a journalist is to give you a place to start your discussion. And I've literally never talked to any journalist or met any journalist who said, well, I mean, I guess I listened to Rush Limbaugh back in the day. He was not a journalist. He was an opinion guy. He used to say that. He used to say, all the news, you know, just listen to me. And I think even the New York Times at one time was all the news that's fit to print. But that's a slogan, and that's not their vocation and their passion, which is really just, their point is to start you and us as a society to begin our conversation. And events like this are really important because this is the conversation we should be having.
All right, that's it for tonight. If anybody doesn't have anything more to say, and thank you so much for coming out. Please give us your evaluations. We appreciate it. Thank you.